In 1799, a 28-year-old Ludwig van Beethoven, already a musical celebrity, noticed an odd buzzing in his ears. At first, the young composer dismissed the noise as a minor annoyance, probably just a bit of trapped water, or perhaps a minor blockage. Either way, it would resolve itself soon enough, right? But as days turned to weeks, and weeks to months, the buzzing refused to go away. In fact, it grew even stronger. Slowly, a gnawing sense of dread began to take hold of Beethoven's mind. What if this condition wasn't temporary? What if it continued to get worse? The implications were staggering. Not only would it damage his hard-earned reputation, but it would effectively put an end to his performing career, the very foundation of his public identity. Beethoven couldn't have imagined it at the time, but this was the beginning of a long battle that would push him to the brink of suicide and ultimately redefine his musical legacy. Before Beethoven's life took this dramatic turn, his path to fame had been a continuous series of triumphs. Born in the German city of Bonn in 1770, Beethoven spent many childhood hours seated at the keyboard under his father's strict discipline. He made his public debut at the age of 7. By 13, he'd already secured a full-time job working as a musician in Bonn's electoral court. Recognized by Bonn's elite class as a burgeoning talent, young Beethoven quickly ascended the ranks of the city's musical hierarchy. He soon became Bonn's most celebrated young virtuoso, performing in the houses of the nobility and basking in their lavish praise. However, despite his early successes, young Beethoven was well aware of the limitations of his small hometown. His worldly ambitions were great, too great to be confined within the German provinces. However, there was one city where he knew his dreams could be achieved. Vienna, Austria's capital, was a city teeming with composers, virtuosos, and a wealthy audience that craved musical innovation. With its vibrant cultural scene and abundant opportunities for artistic growth, Vienna beckoned to Beethoven. He had previously visited the city as a teenager, intent on studying with Mozart. However, fate intervened as Beethoven was quickly called back to Bonn due to his mother's rapidly failing health. She would pass away shortly after his return. It wasn't until the winter of 1792, just shy of his 22nd birthday, that Beethoven once again set out for Vienna. This time, the move would be permanent. He arrived in Vienna in early December, armed with letters of introduction and plenty of ambition. Although he intended to study with Mozart during the first trip, the celebrated composer had unfortunately passed away the previous year. Now, Beethoven sought the instruction of Joseph Haydn, and later, Antonio Salieri, who were two of the most celebrated composers of the era. His early days in Vienna were not without their challenges. Now, on his own, for the first time in his life, Beethoven struggled to find his footing. Vienna was expensive. There were many times when he found himself in tight financial spots, even having to borrow money from his teacher Haydn. But his resilience and self-assurance never wavered. He knew what he was worth, and it was only a matter of time before everyone else knew it too. Beethoven wasted no time in establishing himself. He called on his influential contacts, who all vouched for him. Soon, he began to play in the houses of the Viennese nobility, astounding everyone who had the privilege of hearing him play. He was invited to participate in piano duels, a favorite pastime of the music-loving public where contestants would improvise on a given theme. It was in these competitions that Beethoven's genius really shone through. One by one, he made quick work of any pianist who dared to challenge him. Despite living in a city bursting with talented virtuosos, none could hold a candle to his fiery, expressive improvisations. He swiftly became a crowd favorite. His unique persona, a rough-looking, shaggy-haired, thin little man with a country accent, cut a striking figure against the polished court musicians Vienna was used to. This only served to endear him to the music-loving public even more. His first major breakthrough came when he caught the eye of Prince Karl Lichnowsky, a wealthy and influential music lover who had once been a patron of Mozart. Lichnowsky owned a large apartment building and allowed Beethoven to stay in one of its units. He also introduced him to others in Vienna's elite musical circles. The prince and his wife held weekly musicales at their estate every Friday, and it was during these occasions that Beethoven showcased his remarkable abilities. Because these events were frequented by the who's who of Vienna's musical scene, Beethoven's reputation as a masterful virtuoso quickly skyrocketed. By 1794, a little over a year after his arrival in Vienna, Ludwig van Beethoven was undeniably the city's top pianist. His talents were unmatched, his performances electrifying. But Beethoven wasn't satisfied yet. Oh no. It wasn't enough to be recognized as the top pianist. He had to become the top composer as well. He frequently debuted his new compositions at the Friday musicales hosted by the Lichnowskys, and it was during one of these occasions that Beethoven crossed paths with Prince Franz Lobkowitz. Young, wealthy, and a huge admirer of music, Lobkowitz was immediately captivated by Beethoven's genius. He would eventually become one of his most important patrons, providing financial support and free use of his own personal orchestra. Such generous patronage granted Beethoven unprecedented creative freedom, something that the majority of Vienna's composers could only dream of. It was only a matter of time before Beethoven proved himself to be a dominant force among composers as well. His public theater debut came in March 1795, when he premiered his C major piano concerto with orchestra. This performance was met with resounding applause, and the public reviews were glowing. The event marked another turning point in his soaring career, as he was now attracting the attention of publishers who were eager to do business with him. His first publications in Vienna, a set of piano trios, were met with both critical and commercial success. These works were so popular that wealthy supporters purchased advance subscriptions to Beethoven's future compositions. With each successful performance and publication, he was cementing his status in the musical capitals of Europe. At one point, he even received a commission from the King of Prussia. This rapid ascent was not just a matter of luck, it was the result of his hard work and relentless drive. By the turn of the new century, Beethoven had achieved more than most musicians could ever dream of. His exceptional talents had been recognized by royalty and celebrated across Europe. His compositions were in high demand, and his concerts were events of critical acclaim. With powerful patrons like Prince Lichnowsky and Prince Lobkowitz, and commissions from figures like the King of Prussia, Beethoven had far surpassed the dreams of a young musician from Bonn. However, as Beethoven's fame grew, so too did the envy and resentment among Vienna's musical community. Many established musicians, who had spent decades honing their craft, saw Beethoven, an unconventional, rough-edged young man from the countryside, as a threat. But little did they know that fate had a cruel twist in store for the young maestro, one that would test his resolve more than any human rival ever could. Around 1799, at the age of 28, Beethoven encountered the first signs of an ominous threat that could unravel everything he'd ever worked for. He began to notice the occasional ringing and buzzing in his ears. Initially, he thought little of it. That was, until the noise started to become more and more intrusive. Soon enough, it could no longer be ignored. As the noise intensified, so too did Beethoven's paranoia about its implications. His initial concern soon turned into a creeping dread as the horrifying possibility of his condition becoming permanent began to dawn on him. Faced with this grim reality, Beethoven understandably felt compelled to keep his condition a closely guarded secret. He knew he would be ruined if word ever got out. In the meantime, he continued to compose and perform as best as he could. Business as usual, but underneath the facade of normalcy, he was in a state of utter panic, frantically consulting one doctor after another in search of a cure. For the next year or so, Beethoven bore this burden alone. He had previously intended to go on tour, but the gravity of the situation compelled him to cancel his plans. Instead, he remained in Vienna, where he sought the expertise of countless medical professionals, though effective treatments for hearing loss in the early 19th century Europe were non-existent. His doctors, grappling with the limits of medical knowledge, offered only a parade of ineffective remedies. One prescribed almond oil to be dripped into the ear, another prescribed cold baths, and yet another prescribed herbal pills. As each new prescription proved fruitless, Beethoven's hopes of finding a cure quickly faded. He began avoiding people and keeping largely to himself. The risk of his condition becoming public knowledge was far too great. There were already scores of jealous musicians resentful of his success. Imagine if they were to find out. A deaf musician! There's no doubt they would have taken glee in Beethoven's misfortune. His secret had to be guarded, no matter what. As the months went on, his hearing deteriorated even further. The noise in his ears accompanied him during every waking hour, not letting up for a moment. He avoided socializing, ensuring that no one would discover his career-ruining secret. Unsurprisingly, the stress began to take its toll. By the year 1800, after nearly 2 years of living in a state of paranoia, a 29-year-old Beethoven reached his breaking point. No longer able to bear the weight of his secret alone, he decided it was time to reveal the truth about his condition to those closest to him. At this moment, Beethoven turned to his trusted friend, Karl Lemenda, who was living abroad. The two had formed an instant and deep friendship after being introduced by Prince Lobkowitz, and now he would become one of the first people to learn of Beethoven's condition.
You will soon receive a long letter from me concerning my present condition,
Beethoven wrote. The letter in question, dated June 1st, 1800, marks Beethoven's earliest recorded mention of his deafness, a disclosure filled with personal agony and vulnerability. He writes to Amanda,
How often do I wish you were with me, for your bee is living an unhappy life. Know that my noblest faculty, my hearing, has greatly deteriorated. When you were still with me, I felt the symptoms but kept silent. Now it is continually growing worse, and whether or not a cure is possible has become a question. I beg of you to keep the matter of my deafness a profound secret, to be confided to nobody, no matter whom.
A few weeks later, on the 29th of the same month, Beethoven reached out to another close friend, Franz Wiegler, whom he'd known since his teens. The following letter to Wiegler, who was a doctor, provides the most detailed record of Beethoven's symptoms in his own words. He was careful to detail his current medical treatment, likely hoping that Wiegler could provide some insight.
You want to know something about my situation? It's not so bad. My compositions bring me a fair sum, and I may say that I have more commissions than it is possible for me to fill. People no longer bargain with me. I ask and they pay. However, this envious demon, my health, has thrown obstacles in my way. Namely, my hearing has become worse over the last 3 years. Frank wanted to restore my hearing with almond oil, but alas, nothing happened and my hearing became worse and worse. This continued until the autumn of last year, and oftentimes I was in despair. Then an ass of a doctor advised that I take cold baths for my health, and a more skillful one advised the usual lukewarm ones. These worked wonders for my overall health, but my deafness remained and even became worse. My ears sing and buzz day and night without stopping. I can truly say that I'm living a wretched life. For the last 2 years, I've avoided all social gatherings because it is impossible for me to say to people I'm deaf. If I were in any other profession, it would not matter as much, but in my profession, it is a frightful state. And my enemies, of whom there are many, what would they say about this? To give you an idea of this extraordinary deafness, I tell you that when I'm at the theater, I have to lean forward, close to the orchestra, in order to understand what is being said on stage. When I'm at a distance, I cannot hear the high notes of the instruments or voices. In conversations, it is not surprising that there are people who have never noticed it, as I'm generally absent-minded and they account for it in that way. Often I can scarcely hear anyone speaking to me. The sounds, yes, but not the actual words. But as soon as anyone shouts, it is unbearable. What will come of all this, heaven only knows. I beg you to not tell anyone about this. I only tell it to you as a secret.
The following year marked a further retreat for Beethoven, who became even more withdrawn while continuing his desperate search for a cure.
You can scarcely imagine what a dreary, sad life I have led during the past 2 years.
He wrote to Wegeler in 1801.
If it were not for my hearing, I would have traveled half the world long ago, as there's no greater pleasure than practicing and displaying my art.
Yet, this very pleasure was being cruelly stripped away. Beethoven had devoted his childhood and teenage years to mastering the piano, enduring his father's harsh discipline to become a celebrated virtuoso. He had spent the majority of his 20s earning a formidable reputation in Vienna as a top composer-pianist. Now, all that he'd built seemed to be crumbling down. Gradually, he withdrew from public performances as he could no longer sustain the nuanced touch required for expressive piano playing. It wasn't long before he stopped practicing altogether. Overwhelmed by his circumstances, Beethoven found himself on the brink of despair, a despair so profound that he contemplated ending his own life. In the fall of 1802, at 31 years old, and after several years of gradually worsening deafness, Beethoven reached the height of his suffering. He was advised by his doctors to rest in the countryside, where he could spare his ears from the hubbub of the city. The chosen location was Heiligenstadt, a secluded and peaceful town, one that would soon witness the depths of Beethoven's personal torment. One day, during this retreat, Beethoven received an early morning visit from his student, Ferdinand Ries. Eager to enjoy the fresh air, the two decided to take a stroll together before the start of the lesson. As they walked, Ries noticed a shepherd playing charming tunes on his flute and mentioned it to Beethoven, who heard nothing. Realizing his teacher's distress, Ries attempted to offer comfort by pretending that he didn't hear anything either. But Beethoven knew the truth, and he continued the rest of the walk in gloomy silence. It would appear that this incident was the final straw for Beethoven, as not long afterwards, he took up his pen and wrote his will, a document that would later become known as the Heiligenstadt Testament. This document, addressed to his two younger brothers, contained not only directives on what to do with his body after his death, but also a full confession of the incredible suffering caused by his deafness over the preceding years.
Oh, you men who think or say that I'm malevolent, stubborn, or misanthropic. How greatly do you wrong me. You do not know the secret cause which makes me seem that way to you. For 6 years now, I've been hopelessly afflicted, made worse by senseless physicians from year to year, deceived with hope of improvement, finally compelled to face the prospect of a lasting malady, whose cure will take years or perhaps be impossible. I was soon compelled to withdraw myself, to live life alone. If at times I tried to forget all this, oh, how harshly was I flung back by the doubly sad experience of my bad hearing. It was impossible for me to say to people, "Speak louder, shout, for I am deaf." How could I possibly admit an infirmity in the one sense which ought to be more perfect in me than in others? I cannot do it. For me, there can be no relaxation with my fellow man, no refined conversations, no mutual exchange of ideas. I must live alone like one who has been exiled. If I get too close to people, a hot terror seizes me and I fear that my condition might be noticed. Oh, how humiliating it was when someone standing next to me heard a flute in the distance, and I heard nothing. or someone heard a shepherd singing, and again I heard nothing. Such incidents drove me almost to despair. A little more of that and I would have ended my life. It was only my art that held me back. It seemed to me impossible to leave the world until I had brought forth all that I felt was within me.
The Heiligenstadt Testament was never sent. It was only discovered decades later, in the days following Beethoven's funeral in 1827. Had he followed through with his darkest intentions and ended his life at the age of 31, it's still likely that part of his legend would have lived on. Perhaps he'd be remembered as one of Europe's finest pianists and improvisers. However, the world would have been deprived of his most enduring works. There would be no Fifth Symphony, no Fur-Elise, no Ode to Joy. Imagine the ripple effects his premature death might have had on the next generation of Romantic-era composers, many of whom regarded Beethoven as their guiding light. Fortunately, Beethoven was a man of tremendous courage and strength. He held true to his resolve not to leave this world before bringing forth all that was within him. After this personal crisis, he embarked upon a new path, living for his art, fighting for it, and letting nothing stand in his way. As tragic as his deafness was, it compelled Beethoven to channel all his creative energies into composition. And that begs the question, although he endured what many would consider to be the worst fate for a musician, is it really such a stretch to say that humanity is ultimately better off because of it?